The lecture hall had grown quiet after Professor Yalthari's announcement, and the remaining students sat frozen in their seats as if unsure what to do next or how to process everything they had learned. Minji stood at the front of the room, and she could feel the weight of their gazes upon her, and she understood completely that something fundamental had shifted in how they perceived her. She was no longer just a friendly human exchange student who smiled and made small talk in the hallways. She was a representative of the most successful predator species in galactic history, and they were trying desperately to reconcile that terrifying knowledge with the warm and patient woman who had joked throughout the lecture. Professor Yalthari broke the uncomfortable silence first, and she said, "Sergeant Park, would you be willing to answer some questions from the students before we end? And I believe they have much they want to ask you." Minji nodded graciously and said, "Of course, Professor, and I am happy to help them understand us better." A Salvari student raised her delicate hand tentatively and asked, "Do you really see us as potential family and not as potential prey to be hunted and consumed?" Minji considered the question carefully before answering, because she understood how important her response would be. "When humans look at other species, we see possibilities," she said. "And yes, our distant ancestors would have looked at unfamiliar creatures and wondered if they could eat them or tame them, or if they needed to avoid being eaten by them." The student's large dark eyes widened with visible concern. "But we have grown far beyond those primitive instincts," Minji continued, "and when we joined the Galactic Union, we made a conscious choice to see other sapient species as equals and as potential friends, as part of a larger community that we wanted desperately to belong to." "How can we possibly trust that?" asked the Croton student. "And your own bloody history shows that humans are capable of terrible violence even against members of your own species. You are absolutely right to be cautious around us," Minji admitted, "and trust must be earned through consistent actions over time and not through words alone, and we understand that completely." She walked over to the holographic display and pressed a few buttons. With practiced ease, an image appeared showing humans working alongside various alien species on a massive construction project in space. "This is the Harmony Station," Minji said, "and it was built as a joint project between humans and 17 other species, and it took 20 years to complete." She let that sink in before continuing. "During that entire time, not a single violent incident occurred between humans and our alien partners, and we worked together and solved problems together and celebrated our successes together." She changed the image to show a human doctor carefully treating an alien patient with unfamiliar anatomy. "This is Dr. Yuna Cho, and she has spent her entire career studying xenobiology, so she can help heal species that her ancestors would have seen as strange and frightening and unknowable." Another image appeared showing human soldiers in armor standing guard around a refugee camp filled with various alien species, including several children. "These are peacekeepers from the Terran Defense Force," Minji said, "and they volunteered to protect civilians during the Nexus crisis when raiders were attacking colony worlds." Her voice grew softer. 3 of them died saving people they had never met before from a species they had only learned about weeks earlier, and they gave their lives willingly because they believed it was the right thing to do. She turned back to face the class with determination in her eyes. "Humans are predators," she said clearly, "and we will always be predators. And we cannot change our evolutionary history or pretend it does not exist." The students shifted nervously at this blunt admission. "But we can choose what we do with our predator instincts," Minji continued. "And we can choose to protect instead of hunt, and we can choose to build instead of destroy, and we can choose to love instead of consume." A Mistweller pulsed with curiosity and asked, "Why would you make those choices? And what do you gain from protecting others when you could dominate them instead?" Minji smiled warmly and said, "We gain meaning and purpose." "Meaning," repeated the student with confusion. "Humans need a sense of purpose to be happy, Minji explained. And for millions of years, our purpose was simple survival against a world that wanted us dead. She spread her hands in a gesture that encompassed the entire room and everyone in it. But now, we have survived, and we have conquered our world, and we have reached the stars, and we have achieved everything our ancestors could have dreamed of. She paused. And yet we feel empty and lost unless we have something important to protect and someone who needs our strength. Professor Yelthari spoke up quietly and asked, "So you protect others to fill a void within yourselves, and it is a selfish motivation?" "Perhaps it is," Minji admitted honestly. "But does the motivation truly matter if the result is genuinely good?" She looked around at all the alien faces watching her intently. If our desperate need for purpose leads us to guard the innocent and help those who are suffering and build connections across the vast emptiness of space, then is that not a worthy use of our predator instincts? The class fell silent as they considered her words and the philosophy behind them. Finally, a small furry calorie student from the front row raised their tiny paw and asked in a trembling voice, "Would you eat us if you were hungry enough and if there was no other food?" Minji looked at the small creature, and her expression softened with genuine affection. "What is your name, little one?" she asked gently. "Krill." The student replied nervously, "Krill." Minji repeated, "That is a lovely name, and let me tell you something important about humans and hunger." She crouched down so she was at eye level with the small frightened creature. "Humans have experienced terrible famines throughout our history," she said, "and we know intimately what it is like to be so hungry that we can think of nothing else. And we know the desperation that comes when there is no food and death seems certain." Krill trembled slightly, but did not look away from her eyes. "And in those darkest moments of our history," Minji continued, "humans have shared their last scraps of food with complete strangers, and parents have starved themselves so their children could eat, and communities have rationed their meager supplies so that everyone had something rather than letting the strong take everything from the weak." She reached out slowly and gently placed her hand near Krill's paw without touching them and respecting their space. "We are capable of terrible things when we are desperate," Minji said, "but we are also capable of incredible sacrifice and compassion, and the choice between those two paths is what defines us and makes us truly human." She stood up and addressed the entire remaining class with conviction. "I cannot promise that every human you meet will be kind," she said, "and I cannot promise that humanity will never make mistakes or cause harm, because we are flawed and complicated, and sometimes we fail to live up to our own ideals." She paused, and her voice grew stronger and more confident. "But I can promise you this," she said, "and I swear it on my honor as a soldier and as a human being and as someone who wants desperately to be worthy of your trust." The students leaned forward to hear her words. "As long as I draw breath, I will protect anyone who cannot protect themselves," Minji declared, "and I will stand between the innocent and those who would harm them, and I will use every predator instinct I possess in service of that sacred goal." The room was completely silent for a long moment as her words hung in the air. Then Krill raised their tiny paw again and asked with surprising courage, "Would you like to have lunch with us, Sergeant Park?" Minji blinked in surprise and then laughed warmly with genuine delight. "I would absolutely love that, Krill," she said. Several other students began nodding and murmuring agreement, and soon a small group had gathered around Minji, including the Selvari student and the Croton, and even the nervous mist dweller who had been so frightened earlier. Professor Yelthori watched from her podium with an expression of wonder and dawning hope. "Sergeant Park," she called out, "before you go, I have one final question for you." Minji turned to face her respectfully. "What do humans eat when they want comfort?" Yelthari asked, "And when they are sad or lonely or far from home, what food makes them feel better?" Minji thought about the question, and warm memories flooded through her mind unbidden. She remembered her grandmother's tiny kitchen and the wonderful smell of rice cooking and the sound of vegetables sizzling in a hot pan and the warmth of a ceramic bowl held between cold hands on a winter evening. We eat whatever reminds us of the people who love us, she finally answered. And it is not really about the food itself at all. She smiled at the memory. It is about the memories and the connections, and the feeling that somewhere in the universe, someone cares whether we are fed and happy and safe. She looked at the group of students gathered around her and smiled even wider. And that is exactly what I would like to share with all of you today, she said. Not just food, but the experience of eating together and of being part of something larger than ourselves. The group began moving toward the door, and Krill walked beside Minji with a courage that surprised everyone who knew the timid little creature. Professor Yelthari remained at her podium and watched them leave. With something new in her eyes, when the room was finally empty, she turned off the holographic display and gathered her scattered notes and prepared to leave. The 15-minute break had stretched to nearly 30, and Professor Yelthari had spent most of that time sitting with her head in her forehands while students whispered nervously among themselves and cast worried glances in her direction. When she finally stood up and returned to the podium, her usual confident demeanor had been completely replaced by something closer to resigned acceptance of an unavoidable fate. "I apologize for the extended break," she said, "and I needed time to prepare myself mentally for the remaining material, and I hope you can understand." She looked out at the class and noticed that nearly half of the seats were now empty, and the students who remained looked both terrified and fascinated. "For those of you who have chosen to stay, I appreciate your dedication to academic inquiry and your courage," she continued, "and I promise that we are approaching the end of this lecture." She pressed a button on the display, and a new image appeared showing the internal anatomy of a human body with all its organs visible and labeled. "We have discussed what humans eat," she said, "but we have not yet discussed how they process that food and survive in their hostile environment, and I must warn you that human biology is every bit as disturbing as their dietary habits." The display zoomed in on the human digestive system, and the intricate tubes and organs looked almost alien. Food enters through the mouth, where it is mechanically broken down by hard calcified structures called teeth and chemically broken down by enzymes in saliva, and then it travels to the stomach. She paused and took a breath, where it is dissolved in a bath of hydrochloric acid strong enough to burn through metal. "Acid," repeated a student with horror, "and they have concentrated acid inside their own bodies." "The human stomach produces acid strong enough to dissolve bone and metal," Yelthari confirmed, "and the stomach lining must constantly regenerate to avoid being dissolved by its own contents." A mistweller pulsed with intense distress and said, "They are at war with their own bodies, and their own organs are trying to digest themselves." "In a very real sense, yes," Yelthari agreed. "And this internal conflict is constant and never-ending, and humans simply accept it as normal." She changed the display to show the human immune system with its various cells and chemical markers. "Humans share their bodies with trillions of microorganisms," she explained, "and these include bacteria and viruses and fungi and parasites, and the human body exists in a constant state of biological warfare against foreign invaders. Trillions of organisms inside them," said the Croton student. "And how do they survive with so many enemies within? Through an incredibly sophisticated immune system that identifies and destroys foreign organisms before they can cause harm," Yelthari said. "And let me show you how this remarkable system works." The display showed a white blood cell approaching and engulfing a bacterium in a process that looked almost violent. "This is called a macrophage," she said, "and it actively hunts down foreign organisms within the human body and literally eats them alive, and then displays pieces of its prey on It surfaced to alert other immune cells to the threat. Human cells eat other cells, asked a student with disbelief. Human cells hunt and consume and communicate and coordinate complex attacks against invaders, Yalthari confirmed, and the immune system wages constant war at a microscopic level every single moment of every day. She pulled up another image showing a different type of cell. They even have specialized cells called killer T, cells that are programmed to identify and destroy infected human cells to prevent disease from spreading through the body. They kill their own cells, said a Sylvari student with shock. When necessary, yes, Yalthari said. And humans also have a defense mechanism called fever, where their body deliberately raises its internal temperature to create an environment that is hostile to invading organisms. They cook themselves from the inside. Gasped the student. Minji laughed softly and said, "We prefer to think of it as making ourselves temporarily uncomfortable, to make the invaders even more uncomfortable, and it usually works quite well." Yalthari nodded and said, "This ability to endure self-inflicted discomfort for long-term benefit is a recurring theme in human biology and culture, and you will see it again and again." She changed the display once more, and this time it showed a graph with several dramatic, sharp drops representing mass extinction events. "This is a timeline of mass extinction events on Earth," she said, "and life on that planet has nearly ended completely 5 separate times in the past 500 million years." The students stared at the graph in horrified silence as they processed the implications. The most recent major extinction killed approximately 75% of all species on Earth. Yalthari continued, including the dominant land animals at the time, which were massive reptiles called dinosaurs. "And humans survived this catastrophe?" asked the student. "Humans did not exist yet," Yalthari said. "And they evolved from small mammals that survived by hiding underground and eating insects and waiting patiently for the catastrophe to pass and for the world to become habitable again." She paused and let that information sink in. "Life on Earth exists in a state of constant crisis," she said, "and mass extinction is not a rare occurrence, but a regular feature of the planet's history, and every species that exists today, including humans, is descended from survivors who somehow outlasted multiple apocalyptic events." A student raised their appendage and asked, "What caused these extinction events?" "Various catastrophes," Yalthari said, "including asteroid impacts from space and massive volcanic eruptions that lasted for thousands of years, and sudden climate changes and even changes in the atmosphere's chemical composition." She looked at Minji and added quietly, "And now there may be a 6th extinction event in progress, and this one is being caused by humans themselves." The remaining class turned to look at Minji with expressions ranging from fear to accusation to confusion. Minji met their gazes calmly and said, "She's not wrong, and human activity has caused significant changes too. Earth's climate and ecosystems and many species are dying because of things we have done." "You admit this openly?" asked the Croton student. "We are aware of what we are doing," Minji said, "and many of us are working desperately to stop it or reverse it, and we have created conservation programs and protected wilderness areas and breeding programs for endangered species." Yalthari interrupted with a note of hysteria in her voice and said, "This is what I cannot understand about your species, and you destroy entire ecosystems, and then you protect them. And you drive species to extinction, and then you try to save the survivors, and you cause catastrophic change, and then you fight to reverse it." "We are learning," Minji said simply. "Learning," Yalthari repeated. "And you have been learning for thousands of years, and you are still causing destruction on a planetary scale." Minji's expression became more serious, and she leaned forward in her seat. "We evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill us every single day," she said, "and we had to be aggressive and adaptable and willing to do whatever was necessary to survive another day." She paused and her voice grew quieter. Those traits that kept us alive do not simply disappear because we built cities and developed technology and became civilized, and they are still part of who we are. So you cannot change what you are? Asked the student with something like despair. We are changing, Minji said firmly, and it is slow and painful, and we make terrible mistakes, and we sometimes backslide into old destructive patterns. She looked around the room at all the frightened alien faces. But every generation understands a little more and cares a little more than the one before. And we are not the same humans we were 1,000 years ago. And we will not be the same humans 1,000 years from now. Yalthari stared at her for a long moment and then asked, I have one more question for you, Sergeant Park, and I need you to answer honestly. Please ask whatever you need to know. Minji said, Why did humans join the Galactic Union? Yalthari asked, And you could have stayed on your planet and continued to dominate your own world and expand and consume. And why did you choose to reach out to the stars and join a community of other species? Minji thought about the question for several long seconds before answering. Because we were lonely, she said finally. The class fell into stunned silence. We looked up at the night sky for thousands of years, and we wondered if anyone else was out there, Minji continued. And we built telescopes and radio receivers and spacecraft, and we searched for centuries, hoping desperately to find someone to talk to. You wanted to find more prey, suggested a student nervously. No, Minji said firmly. And we wanted to find family. She stood up from her seat and walked slowly down the aisle toward the front of the room. Humans evolved as deeply social creatures, she explained, and we need connection and community and relationships too. Be happy, and when we finally mastered our planet, we felt empty because there was no one else to share our achievements with. She reached the front of the room and turned to face the remaining class. We came to space because we hoped that somewhere out there, among all those distant stars, we would find others who could understand us and accept us, and maybe even learn to love us despite all our flaws. Yalthari looked at her with an unreadable expression and asked quietly, And have you found that yet? Minji smiled sadly and said, We are still looking, and we have not given up hope. The room was quiet for a long moment as everyone processed what they had heard. Professor Yalthari stood at the front of the lecture hall, and her 4 hands were trembling visibly as she prepared the next section of her presentation, and she had to pause twice to steady her breathing. The students had grown increasingly quiet as the lecture progressed, and many of them were huddled in their seats as if trying to make themselves smaller and less noticeable. Only Minji remained relaxed, and she watched the proceedings with the calm patience of someone who had seen this exact reaction many times before and found it almost endearing. We will now discuss human dietary habits, Yalthari announced. And I want to preface this by saying that what I am about to show you is considered completely normal and even enjoyable by human standards. She pressed a button, and an image appeared showing a table covered with various colorful foods, and the arrangement looked almost artistic. Humans are what biologists call omnivores, she explained, and this means they can derive nutrition from both plant and animal matter, and they regularly consume both without any difficulty. Both, repeated a Selvari student, and they do not specialize in one food source or the other. Humans specialize in everything, Yalthari said, and their digestive system is remarkably adaptable, and they can survive on purely plant-based diets or purely animal-based diets or any combination in between, depending on what is available. She zoomed in on the image to show different food items and began pointing to each one. This is bread, and it is made from ground-up plant seeds, mixed with water and living microorganisms called yeast, and then exposed to high heat until it transforms into something completely different. She moved to the next item. This is cheese, and it is made from the bodily fluids of domesticated mammals, that have been deliberately allowed to spoil using specific bacteria and then aged for months or even years. She pointed to the third item, and this is meat. And it is the cooked flesh of various animals the humans have either hunted or raised specifically for consumption. A student in the front row made a gagging sound but managed to keep their composure through sheer willpower. "I notice you said cooked," observed the Croton student. "And what exactly does that process involve?" "Humans expose their food to fire before eating it," Yalthari explained. "And this process called cooking breaks down complex proteins and kills harmful microorganisms, and makes the food easier to digest and often more flavorful." "They use fire," said a mist-dweller with pulsing alarm, "and deliberately and on purpose. And on their food. Fire is one of humanity's oldest and most important tools," Yalthari confirmed. "And they have been using it for at least 1 million years. And it is so integral to their civilization that they consider it one of the foundations of their entire technological development." Minji nodded and added, "Cooking is actually what allowed our brains to grow larger over time, and the extra nutrition from cooked food gave us the energy we needed to develop higher intelligence." "So fire made you intelligent," said a student with wonder. "Fire made us human," Minji replied simply. Yalthari changed the display to show a detailed breakdown of common human foods and their sources, and the list seemed to go on forever. "Let me walk you through some specific examples, and please try to remain calm as I do so, because panicking will not help anyone." She pointed to an image of elegantly arranged raw fish and said, "This is called sushi, and it is raw fish that humans eat without cooking, and sometimes they eat it while it is still moving and twitching." "Still alive?" gasped the student. "Sometimes." "Yes," Yalthari confirmed, "and humans consider this a delicacy in certain cultures and pay extra money for the freshest specimens." She moved to the next image, which showed a thick, juicy steak with grill marks. "This is beef, and it comes from a large, domesticated mammal called a cow, and humans breed these animals specifically to kill and eat them. And they have been doing so for approximately 10,000 years. They breed animals for slaughter," said the Croton student. "And this is industrial predation on a massive scale." "Correct," Yalthari said. "And humans have developed highly efficient systems for raising and killing billions of animals each year for food, and they consider this completely normal." A student near the back stood up and said, "I need to leave, and I cannot hear any more of this horror." "You may be excused," Yalthari said, "and I understand completely, and please seek counseling services if you need them, and there is no shame in being overwhelmed." The student hurried out of the room, and 2 others followed shortly after with their heads bowed. Yalthari continued despite the departures, and she pulled up an image of various colorful vegetables. "One might think that plant consumption would be less disturbing," she said, "but I must inform you that plants on Earth have developed numerous defense mechanisms to avoid being eaten, and many of these defenses involve chemical warfare." "Chemical warfare," repeated a student with disbelief. "From plants. Plants produce toxins that cause pain and illness, and sometimes death in creatures that attempt to eat them," Yalthari explained. "And humans have learned to identify and avoid the most deadly plants through painful trial and error." She paused for effect and then said, "But here is where things become truly strange and difficult to understand." The class leaned forward nervously. "Humans deliberately eat plants that cause them pain," Yalthari announced. Classroom fell silent in utter confusion. Minji chuckled softly and said, "She is talking about spices, Professor." Yalthari nodded and pulled up an image of a small red pepper that looked almost innocent. "This is called a chili pepper," she said, "and it contains a chemical called capsaicin, and this chemical triggers the pain receptors in the human mouth to create an intense burning sensation. And humans eat this terrible thing." "Why exactly?" asked a student. "For enjoyment," Yalthari said, "and they consider the pain to be pleasurable and they have competitions to see who can eat the hottest peppers, and they deliberately breed peppers to be more painful with each generation. They breed their food to hurt them more, said the Croton student with something approaching respect in their voice. And they do this on purpose. Humans have a complicated relationship with pain, Minji explained, and we have learned to find pleasure in controlled amounts of discomfort, and it releases chemicals in our brains called endorphins that make us feel good. Yelthari added, this pattern extends beyond spicy food, and humans also consume substances that are toxic in large amounts but produce pleasurable effects in small doses. She pulled up an image of various alcoholic beverages in attractive glasses. This is called alcohol, and it is produced by allowing microorganisms to consume sugars and excrete a compound called ethanol. And ethanol is a poison that affects brain function and damages organs with prolonged heavy use. And humans drink this poison voluntarily, asked the student, recreationally and socially, and sometimes as part of religious ceremonies, Yelthari confirmed. And they have been doing so for at least 10,000 years, and probably much longer. We also drink caffeine every single day, Minji added cheerfully, which is a stimulant that plants produce specifically to kill insects, and it makes us more alert and focused, and many humans cannot function properly without it. You drink insecticide, said a Selvari student with absolute horror. Every morning, Minji confirmed, and sometimes multiple times throughout the day, and we call it coffee and tea, and we consider it essential to our daily routines. Yelthari looked like she needed a moment to collect herself, and she turned away from the class briefly before continuing with visible effort. There is one more aspect of human diet that I need to address, she said, and it concerns their relationship with the other species they consume and choose not to consume. She pulled up an image of a human family sitting at a dinner table with a dog sitting nearby, watching them with hopeful eyes. As we discussed earlier, humans domesticated many species, including apex predators like wolves, and yet they do not eat their domesticated companions, and in fact, they often treat them as beloved family members. They choose not to eat certain animals, asked the student. Even though they could, humans have complex social and moral rules about which animals are acceptable to eat and which are not, Yelthari explained. And these rules vary between cultures and change over time. Minji spoke up and said, we recognize that some animals can think and feel and form emotional bonds, and we believe it would be morally wrong to eat them, and many humans extend this concern to all animals and choose not to eat any of them at all. You limit your own predation based on ethics and morality, said the Croton student with surprise. We try to, Minji said, and we do not always succeed, and we argue constantly about where to draw the lines, and it is an ongoing conversation in our civilization that may never be fully resolved. Yelthari looked at Minji with an expression of complete bewilderment. This is what confuses me most about your species, she said, and you are capable of such efficient and widespread predation, and yet you also demonstrate genuine moral concern for your prey and their suffering. Minji shrugged and said, we contain multitudes. What does that mean exactly? Asked the student. It means humans are complicated, Minji replied, and we can be predators and protectors at the same time, and we can kill to survive and also feel genuine sorrow for the lives we take, and both of those things can be true simultaneously. Yelthari stared at her for a long moment and then turned back to the class with exhaustion in her eyes. I believe I need a short break, she said, and we will resume. The holographic display cast a blood-red glow across the lecture hall as every student stared at the highlighted position of humans in Earth's food web, and the silence was so complete that Yelthari could hear her own heart's beating arrows pointed from humans to almost every other creature on the diagram, and a disturbing number of arrows also pointed back toward humans from various predators, and the sheer complexity of it made Several students, dizzy Professor Yelthari took a moment to compose herself, and then spoke in a voice that was not quite as steady as before, and her usual academic confidence had begun to crack. As you can see, humans occupy a unique position in their planetary ecosystem, and they are connected to nearly every other species, either as predator or as prey, or often as both simultaneously. A silvery student leaned forward and asked, "They are prey as well, and what could possibly hunt something that hunts everything else?" "Many things have hunted humans throughout their evolutionary history," Yelthari replied, "including large cats, called lions and tigers and wolves and bears and crocodiles and sharks and venomous snakes and even other humans." The last part of that statement caused a wave of shocked gasps to ripple through the classroom, and several students looked like they might be sick. "Other humans," repeated the Croton student with horror in their voice. "They prey upon their own species and consume their own kind." "Historically, yes," Yelthari confirmed, though modern human civilization has largely moved past this practice, and they now consider it one of the worst crimes possible and punish it severely. Minji nodded from the back row and said, "We call it murder and cannibalism, and we have very strict laws against both, and the overwhelming majority of humans find these acts horrifying." "Thank you, Sergeant Park," Yelthari said, "and I appreciate your willingness to provide context throughout this lecture, even though I suspect it must be strange to hear your species discussed this way. It is educational." Minji replied with a small smile, "And I am learning how other species see us." Yelthari turned back to the display and zoomed out to show the full food web again, and the red highlighting on humans seemed to pulse like a warning beacon. What makes humans truly remarkable is not that they are prey, but rather what they have done in response to being prey. And this is where the situation becomes genuinely unprecedented. In Galactic Records, she pressed a button and the display changed to show a list of Earth's apex predators with images of each one, and the creatures were terrifying in their variety. "Earth has no single dominant predator," she explained, "and instead, it has multiple apex predators that rule different environments and compete for resources." She pointed to each image as she spoke. "These include lions and tigers in grasslands and forests, and wolves in northern territories, and massive bears in mountains, and crocodiles in rivers and wetlands, and sharks and orcas in the oceans." "Multiple apex predators," said a student, "and they do not fight until only one species remains dominant. They exist in what humans call an ecological balance," Yelthari said, "and each predator dominates its own territory and food source, and they rarely come into direct conflict with each other." A Mistweller student pulsed with curiosity and asked, "Where do humans rank among these apex predators, and are they at the top or somewhere in the middle?" Yelthari paused and looked at the display, and then looked at Minji, and then looked back at the display, as if hoping it might have changed while she was not watching. "Humans are not merely among the apex predators," she said slowly and carefully, "and they are in fact the single most successful predator Earth has ever produced, and possibly the most successful predator in galactic history." The classroom went completely silent, and even the ventilation systems seemed to pause. "I do not make this claim lightly," Yelthari continued, "and I have spent decades researching Earth's biology, and I have consulted with human scientists and historians, and I have verified these facts multiple times because I simply could not believe them at first." She pulled up a new image, showing early humans with primitive weapons facing a massive woolly mammoth that towered over them like a mountain of fur and tusks. Humans evolved on the African savanna approximately 300,000 years ago, and they were not the largest or strongest or fastest creatures in their environment, and they had no natural armor or venom or claws or fangs. "Then how did they become apex predators?" asked a student. "And what advantage could they possibly have had?" "Through a combination of traits that no other species in the galaxy has ever demonstrated together," Yelthari said. And the first of these traits is something humans call persistence hunting. The display showed an anatomical diagram of a human body with various systems highlighted and labeled, and it looked almost harmless compared to the predators shown earlier. Humans are bipedal, which allows them to move efficiently over long distances without wasting energy, and they have almost no body hair, which combined with specialized sweat glands allows them to regulate their body temperature far better than most Earth mammals. Sweat glands, repeated a Croton student. And what do those do exactly? They excrete liquid water through the skin, Yalthari explained. And as this water evaporates, it carries heat away from the body, and this allows humans to remain active in temperatures that would cause other predators to overheat and collapse from exhaustion. Minji added helpfully. We can literally run prey to death, and we just follow them at a steady pace for hours or even days until they cannot run anymore, and then we catch them while they are too exhausted to fight back. Several students made sounds of distress at this information, and one Salvari began rocking back and forth in her seat. This is called pursuit predation, Yalthari said, and while humans are not particularly fast by Earth standards, they have nearly unlimited endurance. And they can track wounded prey across entire continents if necessary. Days, whispered a student. They can chase something for days without stopping. The human body is designed for sustained activity, Yalthari continued, and their cardiovascular system and skeletal structure and muscle composition all evolved specifically to support long-distance travel and hunting. She changed the display to show ancient cave paintings depicting group hunts, and the primitive art somehow made the horror more real. But endurance alone does not explain human success, and the second critical factor is their social intelligence and their ability to cooperate in complex ways that other predators cannot match. Humans hunt in packs, observed a Salvari student. They hunt in highly coordinated groups with specialized roles and planned strategies and backup plans for when things go wrong, Yalthari corrected. And they communicate during hunts using language and hand signals, and they can adapt their tactics in real time based on what the prey does. That sounds absolutely terrifying, said a student, and several others nodded in agreement. It becomes more terrifying, Yalthari assured them, because humans also develop tools to compensate for their lack of natural weapons. The display showed the progression of human weapons from simple rocks to sharpened sticks to metal blades to guns and finally to nuclear weapons, and each advancement made the students more afraid. Humans cannot grow claws, so they made them from stone and bone, and they cannot produce venom, so they discovered poisons in plants and animals, and they cannot run fast, so they tamed other animals to carry them across vast distances. A student asked, they tamed other animals, and what does that mean exactly? Yalthari pulled up an image of a wolf standing next to a modern dog, and the contrast between the wild predator and the friendly companion was stark. This is a wolf, and it is one of Earth's apex predators. And it hunts in packs and has powerful jaws and keen senses that can track prey across miles. She pointed to the dog and said, this is what humans made from the wolf over thousands of years of selective breeding, and they took an apex predator and turned it into a loyal companion that helps them hunt and guards their homes and even provides emotional comfort. They domesticated an apex predator, said the Croton student with something approaching awe in their voice, and made it serve them willingly. They domesticated dozens of species, Yalthari said, including large herbivores for food and transportation, and birds for eggs and meat, and insects for honey and pollination, and even microorganisms for food preservation and medicine. Minji smiled and said, we are very good at making friends with other species. That is one way to describe it, Yalthari said, and her voice carried a note of hysteria. And another way would be to say that humans systematically conquered every ecological niche on their planet and bent other species to serve their needs. She pulled up a map of Earth showing human population distribution, and the entire planet was covered in markers. Humans now exist on every continent and in every climate zone, and they live in deserts and rainforests and frozen tundra and on islands, and they have even begun living underwater in special habitats and in space, stations orbiting their world. They adapted to all those environments naturally, asked the student. No, Yelthari said, and this is perhaps the most disturbing part of all. She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Humans do not adapt to environments, and instead, they force environments to adapt to them. The class fell into stunned silence as the implications sank in. Professor Yelthari had taught xenobiology at the Galactic University for over 400 years, and she believed she had seen everything the universe could offer in terms of strange and terrifying life forms. She had studied the acid-blooded creatures of Nexar Prime and the silicon-based organisms of the Kelvin Nebula and the psychic predators of the void reaches, and nothing had ever truly shaken her confidence in her ability to present information in a calm and professional manner today. Would change that forever. The lecture hall was filled with students from dozens of different species, and they sat in specially designed seats that accommodated their various body types and breathing requirements, and the room hummed with quiet anticipation. There were the tall and willowy Silvery, with their pale blue skin and large dark eyes, and the stocky Croton with their armored shells and multiple limbs, and the floating mist dwellers who existed as clouds of sentient gas contained in transparent suits. In the back row sat a single human female, wearing the uniform of the Terran Exchange Program, and her name tag identified her as Sergeant Minji Park, and she looked perfectly relaxed despite being surrounded by aliens who towered over Yelthari. Activated the holographic display at the front of the room, and the image of a blue and green planet appeared spinning slowly in the air, and its beauty was undeniable even as it radiated danger. Today, we will be discussing the ecosystem of Earth, she announced, and her voice carried easily through the room thanks to the universal translator implants that all students and faculty possessed. Earth is a Class 12 death world recently cataloged by the Galactic Survey Corps, and it represents one of the most hostile environments ever discovered that still supports complex multicellular life. A Silvery student raised one of her delicate hands and asked, "Professor, how can a Class 12 world support intelligent life?" And I thought anything above Class 8 was considered too dangerous for sapient species to evolve. Yelthari nodded and said, "An excellent question, and one that xenobiologists across the galaxy are still trying to answer, and the humans themselves seem genuinely confused when we express concern about their homeworld." She glanced at Minji in the back row, and the human woman simply smiled politely and gave a small shrug as if the question amused her. "Let us begin with the basic environmental conditions," Yelthari continued, and she changed the display to show various statistics and diagrams that made several students gasp. Earth has an active molten core that generates a magnetic field, and this same core causes constant tectonic activity, including earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that can destroy entire cities without warning. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats and exchanged worried glances. The planet is covered 70% by liquid water, and this water is not contained in safe underground reservoirs, but exists openly on the surface in massive bodies called oceans that are deep enough to crush spacecraft. A Croton student made a clicking sound of disbelief and asked, "Open water, and how do the land creatures avoid drowning?" "They simply do not enter the water unless they choose to," Yelthari replied, "and many Earth creatures can actually survive in both environments and move freely between them." The Mistdweller student pulsed with agitation inside their containment suit, and their translator rendered their communication as, "This seems inefficient and dangerous, and why would evolution produce such a system?" "It gets worse," Yelthari said, and she pulled up a new image showing Earth's atmosphere composition. and the numbers made several students recoil in horror. The atmosphere is 21% oxygen, and for those of you unfamiliar with this element, it is one of the most corrosive and reactive substances in the universe, and it literally causes metal to decay and organic matter to break down over time. How do they breathe it? Asked a small furry student from the front row whose species Yalthari recognized as the peaceful Kelori. Their bodies have adapted to use the oxygen as fuel for their cellular processes, Yalthari explained, and they actually require it to survive and will die within minutes without it. And they consider this completely normal. A ripple of disturbed murmuring passed through the class, and several students looked at Minji with new fear in their eyes. Yalthari held up one of her forehands to calm them and said, "I understand this is distressing, but we have not yet reached the truly concerning part of today's lecture, and I need you all to remain calm." She changed the display again, and this time a simple diagram appeared showing 3 organisms connected by arrows, and this basic image would soon shatter their understanding of life itself. "This is what humans call a food chain," she said, "and it represents the flow of energy through an ecosystem, and I want you to pay close attention to what I am about to explain." The diagram showed a simple plant at the bottom with an arrow pointing to a small furry creature, and another arrow pointing from that creature to a larger animal with sharp teeth and cruel eyes. The plant produces energy from sunlight through a process called photosynthesis, and the small creature called a rabbit eats the plant to gain that energy, and then the larger creature called a fox eats the rabbit. A student raised their appendage and asked, "You mean the fox kills the rabbit?" "Correct, and then consumes its body." "Yes, and this is the foundation of complex life on Earth. And this is considered normal on Earth, and not some horrible aberration. This is taught to human children as basic education." Yalthari confirmed, and her voice remained steady, even as she watched the horror spread across her students' faces. The classroom erupted into shocked exclamations, and several students looked physically ill, and one, Mist Weller's containment suit, began flashing warning colors. Minji, in the back row, watched with an expression of mild amusement, as if she were watching children learn that rain existed for the first time, and her calm demeanor only made the situation more unsettling. Yalthari waited for the noise to settle and then continued, "I want to emphasize that predation is not considered unusual or horrifying by Earth standards and humans, except it is a fundamental fact of existence." "Children," gasped a Silvari student. "They tell children about death and killing and consumption. They consider it essential knowledge for understanding their world," Yalthari said. "And now I must show you something that took me several days to process when I first encountered it during my research." She pressed a button, and the simple 3-organism diagram disappeared and was replaced by something far more complex and terrifying. The new image showed hundreds of different creatures, all connected by a tangled web of arrows pointing in every direction, and the organisms ranged from microscopic bacteria to massive creatures larger than spacecraft, and every single one of them was connected to death. "This is Earth's actual food web," Yalthari said, and her voice had lost some of its professional steadiness and cracked slightly on the last word. "As you can see, it is not a simple chain, but an interconnected network of consumption and predation, where everything eats and everything is eaten." The students stared in horrified silence at the diagram, and some of them had begun to weep quietly. "Every arrow represents one species eating another," Yalthari continued, "and some species have dozens of arrows pointing toward them, meaning they are prey for many different predators, and some species have dozens of arrows pointing away from them, meaning they consume many different types of prey. How can anything survive in such a system?" asked the Krogan student, and their shell plates had drawn tight against their body in a defensive posture that their species had evolved millions of years ago, through constant competition and adaptation, and billions of years of what humans call natural Selection, Yelthari answered, and the creatures that could not survive simply died, and their genetic lines ended forever. Minji raised her hand politely, and Yelthari nodded toward her with visible reluctance because she was not sure she wanted to hear what the human would say. "Professor, if I may add some context," Minji said, and her voice was calm and friendly and completely at odds with the horror being discussed. "Please go ahead, Sergeant Park. This system of predation is actually what drives evolution and improvement," Minji explained. "And without the pressure of being hunted prey species, would never develop speed or intelligence or cooperation, and without the challenge of catching prey, predators would never develop cunning, or strength or strategy. So death makes you stronger?" asked the student with disbelief. "Death makes us adapt," Minji replied. "And adaptation is how life survives on Earth." Yelthari stared at the human for a long moment, and then turned back to her. "Display with trembling hands, and now we must discuss where humans fit into this web of death," she said. "And I warn you that what comes next is far more disturbing than anything I have shown you so far." She pressed the button, and the food web reappeared, with one species highlighted in red and connected to almost everything else. The classroom fell into terrified silence.